Do you wonder whether you should combine RxJS with Lit? And if so, what are our integration options? We will answer those questions in this video. As we will see, it's quite easy to integrate RxJS into Lit, but is it actually reasonable to do this? In my video Should I Learn RxJS? I already stated that it doesn't make sense to integrate RxJS into a mostly static website. This is mainly because of payload reasons. Depending on how many RxJS operators you include into your project, the bundle size can be quite high. If we think about web components, what quickly comes to mind are reusable components which can be included into any page or app, independent of any libraries or frameworks used in those pages or apps. If you're building a whole set of web components, the relative payload of the used libraries becomes smaller and smaller. So, depending on which kind of web project your web components are targeted for, you should take more or less care about which libraries you are buying into. That said, let's get our hands dirty and dive into some code to see how we can actually integrate RxJS into Lit. To showcase this, I prepared a little app. Let's have a look at the dependencies of the package.json. We have lit, RxJS, and for development we have TypeScript and Vite. Vite picks up the index.html and the count app is rendered here. When we create our components, we will add those here to cycle through them within the application. In our showcases, we will use the count observable, which simply emits a value every second. As a side effect, it logs every emitted value, the subscriptions and the unsubscriptions. And this is what our application looks like. We have initially no component loaded. We have a null value in the array of components, and then we have a switch button. Nothing happens by now because we only have the null value within the array over here. This was the setup of the application. Let's now explore the first way to integrate RxJS into our Lit app. We will use lifecycle hooks to accomplish this. For this, let's create a new component called count lifecycle. We will create a Lit element here. We want to register this as a custom element. And we want to have a state here, which holds our current count. Now we simply render out the count. Let's now first include it into our app.ts. First we have to import it. And then we have to add the name of the custom element to this components array. Now let's see it in action. First we have no component loaded, and if we hit the switch button, our component gets rendered. If we hit switch again, no component is loaded again. We cycle through this array of components. So far so good. Let's have a look how to connect to the observable. The connected callback is a good place to do this. We will add the subscription here. We want to set the count state here. Let's see this in action. First we have no component loaded. If we hit switch, our component gets rendered and it subscribes to the observable, and the subsequent values are emitted and rendered here. If we hit switch again, we switch back to no component, but we notice that we don't unsubscribe again and the values are continuously emitted by the code observable. Let's now fix this. We want to unsubscribe from the observable again when the component is unmounted. So let's first store our subscription here. Then we implement the disconnected callback and unsubscribe if the component was mounted in between. Okay, let's see how this works. If we switch to the component and switch back to no component, we see that we now unsubscribe from the source observable. Nice. This is one way to integrate RxJS into lit elements. But I see two issues here. First, we have to implement a lot of code to get those subscriptions running. Second, we must not forget to unsubscribe again. So let's have a look at another solution to integrate RxJS into lit components. For this, let's create a new file. Let's call it count directives. We will work with a directive here. Let's give it a name and add the component to the app component. Now it should be visible in the app, but there's no content yet. Let's head over to lit.dev, and in the documentation we see custom directives, and right at the bottom we have asynchronous directives. And the directive we are looking for is the observe directive. Let's just copy this over. Okay, let's adapt this to use RxJS. First we do the imports, then let's get rid of those comments. I will explain it a bit to you. And you can also look it up in the documentation. Okay, let's talk a bit about this. The render function receives an observable, and we can already have an observable stored. We keep a reference to one observable up here. And if we already have an observable, we want to switch those subscriptions. We can do this by unsubscribing the subscription, then assigning a new observable here. And if our component, our directive is connected, we simply subscribe again to the new observable. If the observable doesn't change, we emit no change. In the subscribe method of the directive, we simply subscribe to our observable. The values are rendered asynchronously via the setValue method. When the directive is disconnected, we simply unsubscribe from the subscription, if it exists, and when the directive is reconnected, we subscribe again. Now we use the directive factory to create a directive function from our directive class. So let's work with this directive now. Let's simply implement the render function. That's it. This should do the trick. Let's see it in action. If we switch to our count directive component, we see the increasing values, we have the subscription, and if we switch to no component again, we unsubscribe from the code observable. We can now extract this directive to another file. And now we see that this is a very concise solution to render out our observable values. Of course, we can now reuse the observe directive anywhere we want. So obviously this is the better solution. Our two issues are solved. We have less code, and we cannot forget to unsubscribe from the observable again. And we also have another advantage. We have fine-grained reactivity provided by this async directive. If the count observable emits any values, the render function doesn't have to be called again, but only this directive instance will emit a new value, which in our case is only a number, but of course it can be any template result, which can be consumed by the lit templating engine. So that's it for today's video. Now you can start integrating RxJS into your lit apps. Congratulations! If you enjoyed this content and want to support this channel, please give the video a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. And remember, Never stop learning. In this sense, see you in the next video.